A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back once again to video games that are totally awesome. So, for this instance, as you might remember just yesterday, I had talked about the first Five Nights at Freddy's title, but throughout the rest of this week, it might as well be fair for me to go over the other four that I have, in fact, marathon through just recently. There was Five Nights at Freddy's Parts 1, 2, 3, and 4, as well as Sister Location, which were all put together in the unique Five Nights at Freddy's HD collection, which had come out on consoles, including the latest PS5. But as we know, there are still a good handful of other FNAF games that I could talk about just as well, but for the moment, I'll be talking about the 5 in particular that I marathoned through recently. And maybe as a bonus, I'll include one more piece. One more that sometimes acts like a spin-off or maybe something else entirely. Anyways, though, we might as well get started on the sequel, which is actually more of a prequel, Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Some might wonder, though, why exactly would FNAF 2 be a sequel when it actually takes place before the events of the first game? Well, when you think about it, sequels that act more like prequels to a franchise is certainly not an uncommon thing. I mean, you might remember some franchises depicting prequel-like stories in sequels. But as we know by now, Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is still the sum of its parts. It's meant to give us a lot more backstory into the history of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, and also the many things that eventually lead up to the events in the first game. But as we know by now, FNAF 2 unfortunately doesn't quite hold as much success as with the first game. It still has a lot of fan favorite characters in there, like the toy animatronics, Puppet, and who could forget, the original Quadrio that started it all. They're all included in here just as well. Freddy, Foxy, Chica, and Bonnie. But combined with that, you have many other original characters just as well. Balloon Boy being one of them. Another one known as Mangle, whom is in fact revealed to be associated with the infamous Bite of 87 story. But apart from the many other new character introductions, as well as some newer lore that is put together, the storyline does in fact center upon a new security guard known as Jeremy Fitzgerald. This guy, much like what we saw in the first game, operates as the security guard from 12 to 6 a.m. For 5 days straight. He is pretty much giving us the same exact sort of principle when it comes to the game overall. We gotta stay prepared for what could happen. Inside Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, long before the somewhat decrepit state that it ended up in the first game, we're essentially taken to a point in which that it probably leads up to what eventually turns out to be Freddy Fazbear's downfall. It's possible that it does take place a long time before the events of what the first game had to offer. And it's probably clear by now that the infamous Bite of 87 might have taken place by this point, or it could have even just been a certain point before they eventually shut down. Either way you look at it though, getting to play as Jeremy Fitzgerald, a new character in the franchise, whom is what you might call the predecessor to FNAF 1's security guard. One thing's for sure though, we get the same sort of treatment as we did before with the first game. What we gotta do here is stay in our office the whole time, pay attention to our surroundings, in which case there's a hallway that is dark. We can occasionally light a flashlight to it, and it'll, believe it or not, reveal animatronics on occasion. The other characters, of course, are able to flank you via the vents, to the left or right of you. Instead of doors, there's vents now. And on top of all that, getting to watch these vents and the hallway at the same time, if you think that that's an incredible challenge, then well, while the first night is more than straightforward, as we get a similar sort of dialogue coming in from the phone on the desk. The same sort of cliche that we got in the first game. While Scott Cawthon still does come around to give us his unique voice profile in a ways to explain the game's rules and overall how to survive each night successfully, the game, much like the first one, does give us some added challenges that appear later on. For instance, there was a musical box that you can hear in the background. It's the almighty puppet. And the puppet itself does need to have its music box winded up. Because otherwise, what could happen is that the puppet will come out of the box, out to find you. Because you didn't give them their precious music. Yeah. Quite unique, wouldn't you say? In addition to watching out for animatronics on the cameras and in the office with the hallway and vents around you, you gotta wind up a music box to keep the puppet occupied. Oh, but when you think about it, the amount of animatronics here, it's not just the 4 that you gotta avoid, plus the Spirit of Freddy or Golden Freddy, which would technically make 6 overall that you need to avoid. But with the many other characters you gotta watch out for, I mean, you got the original FNAF animatronics, the toy animatronics, and we certainly can't forget the likes of Puppet, Balloon Boy, Mangle, etc. And there's even the withered animatronics, as some might put together, like Withered Chica, whom technically is one of the only pieces that we have here in regards to what eventually gives us the original animatronics. Because after all, a while passes before the first game's events take place, and it's possible that, well, many of them have gone through repair. Even we get to see good old Golden Freddy out there. Not quite as in a bad state as we saw in the first game, but there's still that good opportunity that comes around where some characters will be seen visually and not in as much of a bad state as one would suspect. Anyways, though, part of the lore that comes around to this game is that while this is a prequel, it still does have lots to talk about. With Fitzgerald, for instance, he does have to, well, take a good look at what goes around. Well, there of course was the dialogue on the phone that taught us about how the previous security guard, known as William, he moved on to the day shift after complaining about the night shift and the many problems it carried on to. We know that with Jeremy, he was not anything like William. In fact, if we were able to survive all 5 nights in a row, then, well, we get the similar sort of treatment. We get ourselves the paycheck, we get ourselves the happy ending to the story, and that's pretty much what we have at this point. But as we know by now, well, William is, in fact, led to believe that his move to the day shift had actually resulted in the deaths of several children. Yeah. And while the William in particular that we're talking about hasn't had much talked about, it would later be revealed that William's last name is Afton. And one thing that's important about the Afton family, not just with William, but with others involved as well, is that they actually have a big part to play in regards to the animatronics and in regards to the events of Five Nights at Freddy's. The disasters that have unfolded at Freddy Fazbear's, the fear that has been put together in the state of Utah, and who could forget the unique innovations of the spring lock suit, which were responsible for the fabrication of all the animatronic characters. And of course, the dangers of stuffing a person inside of it. That's basically the main reason how in the first game, it was basically a death sentence for the security guard to get caught by the animatronics and then stuffed into one of the Fazbear suits. The thing is that the spring locks, upon the first noticeable feel, they will automatically eject. And these spring locks, when they activate, it's likely game over. You could imagine hundreds of pieces getting lodged in your body. Perforations, lacerations, abrasions, and of course, piercing all the way through the bone even. It's quite a horrifying sight, to be honest with every one of you. But in and of itself, that's basically part of the fun of understanding about the storyline within the FNAF community. And with hundreds of people out there, And the many popular gamers all over the world that played the first game, many of them had joined up and played the second game. And I will say, watching through a good amount of YouTubers over the years, it's fair that the second game has gotten a lot of good reception, much like the first one. While I can't say it equates to the level of popularity and success as the first one did, FNAF 2 still does have its place in the timeline. After all, with the original quadrilogy in 2014 and 2015, they truly felt not only canon, but also necessary to establish a storyline and eventually lead us up into one big showdown with the Glamrocks in 2021's Security Breach. And I have talked a lot about Security Breach in HJN Super Graphics just a few months ago. But to tell you the truth, from what I've seen in FNAF 2, you have a lot of great characters in mind. You have the unique storyline and all the dialogue that Scott Cawthon puts together for the phone, conversations with Jeremy while in the office. And of course, we certainly can't forget the fact that we also have had a lot of new lore to work with, because ever since the first game came out, there's been some speculation, some storyline, and even some confirmed tidbits of information for anybody to understand. And I feel like that makes this a worthy sequel regardless of the circumstances that it plays, or regardless of whatever role it has regarding storyline and regarding the events that led up to the first game. And with the third and fourth game, they do take on a bit of different paradigms in comparison to the first one being an original, the second being more of a prequel than a sequel, and the third and fourth technically both act more like sequels in a way, but they both have a bit of a different feel to them. Like I've said though, throughout the rest of this week, you can expect me to talk a bit more about the original quadrilogy, plus Sister Location, as a bonus pretty much. Until then though, FNAF 2 will get itself a good 8.0 out of 10.1. While not exactly as amazing as what the first game did, it doesn't quite bring out the unique feeling of horror that the first one did. The first one practically put horror all the way out to the side and just started putting in lots of elements to truly instill fear into our hearts and minds. But the jump scares still are a great piece, even if they're nowhere near as scary. Anyways, though, that's it for today's piece, and I'll be back tomorrow with part 3 in tow.